The carriage rocked back and forth gently as the group remained seated in their various positions. A look of curiosity was dawning upon each of their faces as they continued along the early stages of the path. Anticipation was building with every turn and shift that the wheels made. Meanwhile, Core sat in one corner of the carriage, having spread several matter sprites across the floor for everyone to see. He was pointing to each sprite in turn, trying to explain what each one represented and what priorities it possessed. "So that's electricity, fire, ice, cosmos, negative, crystal," he listed. "Plant, duplication, wind, power, water, then light and dark," Core said, pointing to the last two. The light sprite shimmered with a beautiful faint yellow, casting warm reflections across the surrounding surface. The dark sprite, by contrast, glowed a deep red and black with a tiny eye visible on the inside, seeming to gaze back at whoever looked upon it. The contrast between the two was striking. Coco leaned her head forward slightly, her interest clearly drawn by the final sprite. "Ew, what does the dark one do?" she asked. Core gave an uneasy shrug. He seemed hesitant to answer. It's one of those things that requires seeing to believe," he said vaguely as he began gathering the items back into his pouch. "And you just discovered these things one day? Just like that? That's cool," Tinny remarked as he sat beside Sky, who was busy tinkering with one of the mechanisms on her burnout racing boot. "Yeah, it's a pain in the ass to collect them, so that's why we use them sparingly," she replied, cursing as a spring sprang loose from the boot's heel. Toonie quickly caught it with a small tendril before handing it back to her. "Thanks," Sky responded with a smile. "How's Jay holding up?" Winona asked. Voyd nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Not a scratch," he replied confidently, gesturing to the sparkling who seemed perfectly content despite the bumpy ride. Jay then looked at Winona and giggled. A look of relief fell across the group as the carriage continued on, the gentle rocking motion creating a surprisingly peaceful atmosphere despite the uncertainty of their destination. "I wonder if we'll meet this collector guy," Joby asked from Sika's lap, her large yellow eyes bright with excitement. The mention of the collector had been on several minds since they first learned of their upcoming destination. "I'd rather not," Andy replied, reaching for another pickle from their jar. Andy crunched it loudly in the small space. It was almost deafening. Voyd winced, visibly, as he watched Andy chew the pickle with enjoyment, disturbing him on some fundamental level. "Dude, why have you been eating raw pickles?" he asked. Andy looked up with a shrug. "They're my comfort food," they replied simply. The response left Voyd pondering, his face scrunching slightly as he tried to understand why. "Sorry, that just sounds gross," Voyd said after a moment, expressing his genuine disgust. There was no malice in his tone, merely a straightforward opinion. "Don't knock until you've tried it, my man," Andy replied, reaching into their jar and retrieving another pickle. They extended it toward Voyd in an offering gesture, their expression suggesting they genuinely believed he might change his mind if he just gave it a try. Voyd quickly waved it off, declining the offer. However, before the moment could pass entirely, Sky spoke up from across the carriage. "Yo, little green guy, mind if I give it a try?" she asked. Andy turned to Sky, nodding, and handed her the pickle. Sky, due to having a considerably bigger body, was able to eat the entire pickle in one bite. She chewed softly. Her expression was unreadable as she processed the flavor. After a moment, she nodded slowly before raising her thumb up. "Solid 7, she announced, giving her opinion. It was met with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment from the group. Then, without warning, Brumble's carriage halted. The sudden stop shook everyone slightly, and a moment of confusion passed before the sound and sight of the back of the carriage opening drew their attention. "We have arrived, travelers. Before you awaits the old temple factory. I shall be waiting for you all on the other side," Brumble boasted from the front, his voice carrying that same jovial edge from before. The group took a collective breath. They stood from their various positions, stretching, and then began the process of exiting the carrier. As they did so, they rounded to the front where Brumble remained at the reins. "Thanks for the ride," Voyd thanked. Brumble bowed his head in acknowledgement. "Just fulfilling my purpose," he replied with a gentle tone. Then his expression grew more serious as he continued. "I do recommend keeping that lid closed over the baby. Things are likely to get more hectic inside." He gestured vaguely towards the temple that loomed ahead. Voyd nodded, taking the warning seriously. "Best of luck. You're gonna need it." Brumble bid his farewell, snapping the reins and urging his carriage forward. Brumble rode off into the tree line, leaving the group standing before their next destination. "What a guy," Jaida said, watching the carriage disappear into the foliage before turning to face their next challenge alongside the others. Like the Arch of Hearts, this temple was overgrown. Vines and moss had claimed much of the exterior, softening the harsh edges of what was clearly a once majestic structure. The temple itself was constructed from large, weathered stone blocks, each one filled with carvings and ancient spark text that told stories of times long since past. Two prominent towers rose from the main structure, their forms partially obscured by frozen snow that clung to every available surface. Slowly, they approached the structure together, climbing a flight of old, cracking stairs. Upon entering, they were greeted to a large room that was littered with tons of oddities, a chaotic collection of objects that seemed to have no rhyme or reason to their arrangement. The first thing they saw was illuminated by the light emanating from a hole in the ceiling, which lit up a wall panel. This panel was adorned with intricate glowing symbols that formed old spark-like patterns in ancient script, with a prominent light and dark motif that seemed almost deliberate now with the path's design. Flanking what was an altar-like structure were two large, weathered stone statues of spark figures. The statue on the left portrayed a pregnant sparkette, her expression one of what looked to be anticipation, while the statue on the right held a child close. However, both figures looked placed there rather than being an integral part of the temple's design. It was as if someone had moved them to this location deliberately. They were off-centered with the flooring, sloppy in their positions. That was when they noticed it more fully. There were tons of items that didn't belong there, objects that had clearly been brought in from elsewhere over what must have been a considerable span of time. More female statues stood in various corners, varying wildly from the other. Trinkets of unknown origin sat scattered on the floor. Nets hung from the cracked roof high above, holding jewels and scrap metal alike in a messy display. It was an odd sight to behold. It was like a museum of junk arranged without any real rhyme or reason. "Well, whoever this guy is, he's living up to his name," Ellie said, tapping her baseball bat upon the ground as she surveyed the chaos. "Was the collector ever mentioned in the tales about the Path Core? I can't really remember," Voyd asked, turning to his brother. Core shook his head, his eye scar catching the light in a more highlighted state. "The challenges in those testaments were rather vague in study. I remember reading about some kind of factory, but nothing about a collector," he explained, looking up at one of the statues as he spoke. His gaze settled upon a statue of Matira herself, tall, sharp, and wise in the way she was depicted. "I wish I had an answer too, kiddo. Although we were close, these were things only Matira left to herself. She ain't ever mentioned a collector," Coxon added, taking in the scene with equal measures of curiosity and caution. "Collector? Come on, doesn't that sound corny to anyone else?" Francine scoffed, taking a few steps forward as she surveyed the treasures. "Don't want to sound cocky, but after surviving Lois and Warnog, I think we can handle someone who has an obsession problem," she added, a snarky smile crossing her features, similar to her younger, more rude days. She continued taking confident steps forward. "Hey now, Cherry. We don't exactly know what we're dealing with. I'm all for poking fun at a threat, but maybe just tone it down a little," Voyd warned, continuing to survey the surroundings even as he addressed Francine. "Oh yeah? What could a little twisted hoarder do to stop us?" Francine asked, throwing her arms out wide in a gesture of defiance. "Hey, Collector! I'm stealing your stuff! What are you gonna do about it?" She called out into the cavernous space, as some of the others chuckled nervously, while others merely rolled their eyes at her bravado. However, moments after she said those words, the mood began to shift. It started subtly, a slight wind picking up from nowhere that seemed to permeate the space. Tooney's body shuddered involuntarily, dark matter bubbles began to bloom off his hands, responding to what was happening. Then it began to happen. From behind Francine, pieces of metal that had been scattered across the floor began to move. Tools, cables, and various other metallic objects that had been collected over who knew how many years. They were suddenly pulled together by some unseen force. Together, everyone looked upon it with widening eyes, watching in a mixture of horror and fascination as something began to take shape in the chaos. Francine slowly stepped back, her confident demeanor evaporating as she realized she had possibly made a grave mistake. The formation grew and grew, becoming an amalgamation of rusted steel and other recycled materials that somehow combined into something that was both mechanical and alive. 4 arms formed upon itself, dark matter oozing from each seam where the pieces joined together. A red energy began forming within its chest, pulsing with an ominous rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the heartbeat of everyone present. Then, what could barely be called a head morphed into the center of its body. Just a red eye and a steel-red burning horn that seemed to radiate malevolent intention. Steam began to radiate off its body, hissing and whistling as the various mechanisms within began to function in ways that defied explanation. Everyone who had weapons drew them instinctively, while those who didn't took cautious steps back, trying to put distance between themselves and the creature that had formed from the Collector's treasures. It then dawned upon them that this was actually the Collector themselves. "You just had to say something, didn't you?" Ellie asked, her voice tight with barely suppressed tension, as she assessed the threat before them. Francine could only swallow her own words. The Collector glared down upon them with its singular red eye. Its limbs groaned as it moved, and its breath left through a vent on its side. Then suddenly, it raised one of its large, gangly metal hands and slammed it on the ground with tremendous force. Upon doing so, it uttered 2 words that cut through the tension like a blade. Suddenly, plates opened upon the ground, appearing beneath everyone's feet without warning. In unison, they all fell. They shouted, tossing and turning as they descended, being separated by the fall. The impact came without warning. One moment they were falling through darkness, and the next, bodies slammed against cold stone floors across multiple chambers deep beneath the temple. The force of the landing sent shockwaves through limbs and teeth, but everyone stirred, bruised but alive. They had been separated into different groups, scattered like seeds across an underground network of rooms and corridors. Voyd, Jaida, Tooney, Core, Sika, Sky, and Joby, as well as Cogson, found themselves in one chamber, while Winona, Francine, Cece, Andy, and Bianchi another. The final group was Ellie, Coco, and Jay, who had landed in their own isolated section, cut off from the others by thick walls and winding passages. The first sounds that filled the spaces were those of stirring bodies and sharp intakes of breath. Hands pressed against floors pushed torsos upright, and heads swiveled wildly as their eyes struggled to adjust to a new, dim, ambient glow that bathed everything in shades of deep blue and green. "Jay! Jay!" Voyd's voice tore through the silence, echoing down vents that carried his words. He scrambled to his feet, his soul chamber hammering against his ribs as he scanned the unfamiliar surroundings. The walls seemed to close in around him. "Where's Jay?" Jaida's cry followed close behind, her voice cracking with raw fear. In their isolated section, Ellie and Coco slowly rose to their feet, their bodies aching from the fall. As their vision cleared, they caught sight of the hover carriage upright and safe. Jay looked up at the two women with wide, curious eyes, unharmed by the ordeal. After a moment of assessment, he let out a sound. "Apple," he said softly, reaching his tiny arms towards them. "He's with us. He's okay," Ellie called back, her voice carrying through the narrow chambers and finding its way to the others. The relief that flooded through Voyd and Jaida was immediate and overwhelming. They had to steady themselves against a nearby column to keep from collapsing. "Is everyone alright?" Winona called from her group, her voice echoing down the shafts and ventilation lines that crisscrossed through the underground complex. "We're fine. It looks like the collector split us up," Sika called in response. As she spoke, Joby leapt onto her back, anchoring herself there once more. Everyone stood where they had landed, each gazed at the layers of stone and metal separating them from their friends. The chambers they found themselves in were of narrow halls, designed with accents of spark tech lining them, glowing faintly with that blue-green light that seemed to pulse with an inner life. Marble statues of sparks lined the walls between columns. Like above from the previous room, there were items scattered about. "Are you sure Jay is okay?" Jaida repeated. Her hands had curled in the fists at her side, and her eyes kept darting toward the direction from which Ellie's voice had come. "He's okay! Seriously, he's good!" Coco called back, kneeling beside the protecto crib. She brushed dust from Jay's head with her gentle webbed fingers, her own heart still racing, but now of relief rather than fear. The baby giggled at her touch, reaching up to grab at her hand with surprising strength. A soft, relieved chuckle escaped Coco's lips, despite everything. "He's still being a goober," she assured. Everyone took a second to just calm themselves, letting the knowledge that they were all safe wash over them like a wave. Sika shifted Joby's weight on her back, while Skye brushed herself off, and Cogson's eyes narrowed as he took in their surroundings.
"Just did a scan of our area, friends,"
Jet's voice announced from behind Voyd's neck. However, his words were slightly distorted.
"It appears we've been dropped into the temple's underground chambers. It looks like to be a labyrinth of rooms and halls. However, there appears to be a large exit northwards. That's where all tunnels seem to connect."
Everyone turned their heads north, all seeing their unique pathways ahead. The directions were the same, but the routes were different. Lovely," Andy muttered, adjusting their cap. The sarcasm was audible. They had been in enough strange situations by now that their responses had become almost mundane. "Why do we always end up in weird buildings, man?" Tooney cried, his frustration bubbling to the surface. He slowly began to march forward, his feet dragging slightly as if the weight of their situation had attached itself to his ankles. "All part of the journey, Toonster," Winona called back, gesturing forward with her head towards the others. "Let's go, crew." Francie nodded, while Meowcree leapt upon her shoulder with a wobbly mannerism. "Oh, well, this should be fun," Cece said with a little clap. "Fun. Yeah, okay." Andy groaned, clearly not sharing the sentiment. Their annoyance was practically radiating from them. "What was that, Andy?" Cece asked. "Nothing," Andy assured, though the words sounded as if cracks were already forming in their attitude. "Ellie, Coco, keep him safe. We'll see you soon." Voyd called through the chambers that separated them. The two women nodded as they looked back down at Jay. He seemed content, if a bit bewildered by the strange turn of events.
"Apple,"
he repeated, reaching up toward Ellie. Ellie and Coco looked at each other awkwardly, with the same question in their minds. How exactly did one navigate an ancient underground labyrinth with a baby in tow? We began the move, Coco taking the lead and Ellie staying close to the carriage. Jay followed behind as he watched the ancient walls slide past. The carriage moved with a soft hum, carrying them through the passage that had not seen travelers in ages untold. As they moved, everyone else moved as well, heading deep into the old temple factory. Voyd led his group through the sprawling chambers of the facility. Their footsteps echoed against the walls that were daubed in dangling items. Each room they passed held fragments of lives that were abruptly ended. Skeletons of animal creatures were twisted in poses of suffering, alongside the remains of beings who had clearly originated from the matter realm rather than the sparks themselves. They were not travelers who had chosen the path willingly. They looked to be regular casualties. Jaida's ponytail swayed with each cautious step as she walked beside Voyd, her eyes scanning the grim displays. Beezus. What happened to them? Were they walking the path too? They aren't sparks. She asked with uncertainty. Core stepped over a cracked skull without breaking a stride. More than likely not. Although this is the path, it was created on natural grounds within the realm. These were the unfortunate deaths of the native beings unknowingly passing through. As Core spoke, Voyd found himself tilting his head, processing the information. So, there's just beings that live in the region? Core nodded. Would be very surprised if not. The group continued forward, but Jaida's worry had bubbled over. Oh god, I hope Jay is okay. Blue, what were we thinking? She exclaimed, her frustration evident as she glanced back toward the way they had come. Voyd's response was gentle but firm, his eyes settling on the ground as he walked. We couldn't just leave him behind, Jaida. Besides, it would only be a matter of time until we got wrapped up in something like this. You know how we are, the lives we live. Sky added her own reasoning to the conversation. I mean, Mom brought us on missions when we were infants. It's sort of a Novason family custom. Sika then offered reassurance. Even so, sparklings need to be near their parents for a good while after birth. It's good for them to be out and about, to see the world, to feel the danger. If anything, it's natural for our species to be doing this at such an age. Jaida, although shocked, nodded to this, but her maternal instincts remained unsettled. Okay, sure, but I'd rather him be beside us than elsewhere. I trust Elle and Cokes, but my baby... Before anyone could respond further, the group emerged into a massive chamber that stole the breath from their lungs. The central area formed a large, circular space that looked akin to an arena sprawled out before them. Its floor was rough and uneven beneath their feet. Multi-tiered mechanical structures rose along the sides, looking to have once been used for construction. Embedded within these walls were dozens of sealed doors. Fading light filtered down from somewhere above, casting the space in a combination of gold and pale yellow against the blues and greens. Thick power cables snaked across the ceiling and surged upward in the shadows. The effect was haunting, beautiful in a way that made everyone's skin prickle with unease. What the hell is this? I thought this was supposed to be a factory. Tooney voiced what they were all thinking as they walked towards the center of the room, their boots crunching against debris scattered across the arena floor. Jet's voice then boomed through.
It is, however. We are in the lower regions. I believe this was once a storage space.
He said through his broken voice. A storage space for what? Sky asked. The answer came with a deafening clang. The door they had entered through slammed shut like a tomb ceiling, making everyone spin around in unison. Their breaths caught as one. Uh-oh, Joby said with a smile. Then they heard it. Loud clanking echoed from somewhere above, metal striking against metal in a rhythmic pattern that grew closer with each passing second. Every eye turned upward towards the sound. From an opening in the ceiling, the collector emerged. It dropped down and hung there, suspended by its feet, its body twisted at an unnatural angle. The collector gazed down at them all with its single burning red eye. Dark matter oozed from the breaks in its body, dripping down toward the floor in thick, vicious strands. Everyone stared back, tension coiling through their bodies. Hey! What's the big deal, you freak? Jaida called up to the creature. The collector gurgled in response, its voice bubbling and distorted as it recoiled back around the ceiling. It pressed one elongated hand against the wall, and a sickening ripple spread outwards from the contact point. The plates on the floor began to shift again. The doors surrounding the arena opened one by one, revealing the darkness beyond the threshold.
Fight and gain new toys, new playthings.
The collector wheezed out, its twisted pleasure evident in every distorted syllable. The group formed a tight circle, backs pressed together as they surveyed the opening doorways. From within the darkness, shapes began to emerge. From one doorway came figures that looked akin to Spartan warriors. Armor of steel, bronze, and gold encased their forms, but what filled that armor was not flesh. Orange dark matter bulged at the seams, and eyes protruded from unnatural locations, staring with hungry emptiness. Swords dragged across the ground with grinding metal sounds, and shields were held in positions that should have been standard, but somehow felt wrong. Behind these armored husks, floating spheres of sludge drifted into the arena, their bodies churning with dark matter that surrounded singular eyeballs. They were just that, floating eyes. Another door released a creature of red dark matter, its form hunched and powerful. Natural armor plates covered its body, and its hands ended in oversized claws that scraped against the stone floor. Its head swung loosely at the end with a wrinkled neck, ending in a bladed antenna that twitched with anticipation. A third doorway released another monster. This creature was purple, bulky, and built for violence. The most disturbing of all was its complete absence of a head. Two red eyes gleamed from the center of its chest. For a mouth, there was only an opening in its belly that was filled with jagged teeth, as well as a large tongue. In its massive hands, it carried a long mace studded with cruel spikes. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, it slammed the weapon down, sending orange sparks crackling across the arena floor. The final beast was the largest of them all, a towering mass of light purple flesh with red accents that seemed to glow with inner energy. Sharp horns curved back from its head and its sides. Its right hand ended in a massive claw that could gut a target in a single swipe. Faded patches of brown clothing hung from its frame in tatters, giving it a primitive, almost caveman-like quality. On its left breast, a heart bulged within the flesh, beating with visible rhythm that echoed like a drum in the silence. Its face was flat and sharp, fangs jutting from a mouth that curved into an expression that could only be described as a deadly smile. The collector began to clap its hands together in grotesque appreciation of what was to come. Down below, the group moved into combat positions, without hesitation. Spark essence flickered the life as Nova Blades materialized in hands. Jaida summoned her hammer, the weapon appearing with a familiar hum that steadied her nerves. Tuni's body began to crackle with barely contained energy, emerald celestia dancing across his skin as dark matter bubbled from it.
Looks like it's turned this place into a fighting pit.
Clarkson called out, turning his cane into his axe. No kidding, Voyd agreed, his eyes flicking to Jaida to assess her readiness. Are you good to fight? Jaida's smile was fierce. You bet. Haven't had a good fight since I got pregnant. Let's hope I'm not rusty. Core ready to spear. Sika's scythe curved elegantly in her grip, its blade gleaming with a threatening aura. Sky rayed her blades, sending them spinning in predatory patterns. Joby settled herself more comfortably on Sika's back, her expression shifting to one of grim amusement. Ha! They're screwed! As if responding to her taunt, the dark matter monsters lunged forward in a coordinated wave of claws, blades, and hungry fury. The group met the charge with their own battle cries, and the arena erupted into chaos. With a flip and diving lunge, Voyd clashed blades with the dark matter legionnaires. Their weapons buckled under the weight of his strike, groaning under the pressure of spark essence. Jaida moved beside him, swinging her massive hammer in a crushing arc against the swinging antenna of the red dark matter beast. The impact sent tremors to the arena floor. Tuni flew and danced among the floating eyes, his movements quick and precise. Sika and Sky worked in tandem against the belly-mouthed creature, their blades ringing against the monster's heavy mace. Across the arena, Cogson and Core together engaged the large brute whose chest pulsed with a violent heartbeat. They clashed as one unified front, colors flashing across the arena as they fought in seamless coordination. The floating eyes whipped through the air and struck at Tuni, who twisted his body low and evaded the attack at the last moment. With a sharp whip of his arm, He unleashed 2 concentrated beams of celestial energy directly into the floating orb. The eyes popped one by one, releasing dark matter that crawled and recoiled as it hit the floor before dissolving into nothing. Voyd twisted his Nova Blade in a sharp twirl, knocking an incoming blade aside before stepping forward to sever the goopy arm of the dark matter Spartan. The creature let out a guttural howl as its limbs separated, splattering thick sludge across the stone. Voyd followed up with a powerful kick, sending the wounded beast crashing into the wall, where its armor clattered and its body slid down in a trail of ooze. Whirling around to face the next threat, Voyd delivered a sharp punch that brought the second matter being to its knees. Jaida moved instantly, raising her hammer high and bringing it down with crushing force. The creature flattened beneath the blow. As she finished her swing, Jaida swiftly spun on the handle of her hammer, using the momentum to carry her around in a devastating kick that caught the red matter beast in its side. The creature stumbled, but before it could recover, Jaida warped. She vanished and reappeared in the air above the beast, her hammer already raised. She brought it down upon the creature's skull with terrible force, crushing it instantly. The red dark matter splattered across the ground, the beast's form collapsing in the mush, its antenna twitching. The belly-mouthed creature smashed its mace down in wide, crashing swings around Sky and Sika, trying to crush them beneath its weight. The 2 Sparkettes moved like water, flowing around each other with sharp attacks. Sky watched the monster's legs carefully, waiting for a moment. When the creature raised its mace for another strike, Sky deployed her wheels and darted forwards, slicing deeply across its calves. The dark matter creature's legs buckled beneath it, sending it off balance. Sika didn't waste the opening. She threw a glowing red Nova rune directly into the monster's exposed side. The rune burst on contact, tearing through the dark matter and causing the beast to stagger on its knees. One of its eyes burst on the concussive force. Taking advantage of its blindness and confusion, Sika raised her scythe high and shouted as she brought it down. The blade cut clean through the creature's torso, slicing it cleanly in half at the mouth. Both halves collapsed onto the ground, mush and fleeing sludge spread across the floor where they fell, its tongue flopping like a fish before Sika crushed it with a stomp. Across the arena, the largest matter beast struck at Core with brutal force. Core raised his blade to deflect the blow, the weapon sparking orange where the dark energy met spark essence. He pushed back against the monster, slashing at its weapon arm and sending the creature stumbling toward Cogson. Cogson swung his axe in a sweeping arc, connecting with the beast's leg and sending dark matter spraying. The monster howled in pain, its voice echoing through the hall. Before it could recover, Voyd leapt into the fight. He slashed across the creature's large heart, causing the beast to hobble backward, its movements growing clumsy. Core didn't hesitate. He deployed a shotgun and fired, blowing the monster's head clean off. Dark matter sprayed across the battleground, and the beast's body dissolved just like the others, leaving only a fading puddle of ooze. Swiftly and easily, they had won, but Core didn't rest. As the last traces of dark matter disappeared, he raised his shotgun and fired upwards at the collector. The beast screeched in agony, its form spasming from the assault. It scrambled back from where it had come, leaving behind raining debris and fading wisps of dark matter that dissolved before hitting the ground.
Disgusting,
Sika hissed, wiping muck from her face.
You could say that again.
Jaida grumbled in response.
Disgusting!
Sika cried. Voyd's attention shifted away from the fallen enemies, as he noticed something about Core's weapon that made him pause. His eyes narrowed, as recognition flickered across his face. He studied the shotgun in Core's hands. Wait. Is that? Voyd asked, unable to finish the question. His voice held a note of disbelief. Core nodded slowly.
Yeah. It's Mom's.
Core confirmed. He held the weapon up for Voyd to examine more closely.
I found it beside her body when we went back to the castle. I modified it to match my colors, but I kept the mechanisms all the same.
Voyd stepped closer, nodding as he recognized the craftsmanship. The weapon that had helped save his life years ago now rested in Core's hands, transformed but the same. I knew it looked familiar, Voyd said quietly. Does it still have the shield? Core didn't answer with words. Instead, he activated the mechanism with a press of his thumb. The shield folded into existence before them. The color had changed to match its new color scheme, but the protection it offered remained just as strong. Voyd nodded again, this time with a small smile. "Come on, we gotta get moving before that thing finds Jay and the others," Jaida shouted from ahead. She had already reached the sealed door that blocked their path. Without waiting for the others, she projectile warped it open. The heavy stone door crumbled beneath her ability, exploding outwards into dust and rubble. The others exchanged glances and nodded. There would be time for reflection later. Right now, Jay and the others needed them. The A&N crew slowly found their way into a large room, one that once seemed to have been used for building devices. However, it now served a different purpose entirely. What was once a large creation station had been transformed into a makeshift library, repurposed by the hands of the collector. The area was dominated by towering, curved bookshelves that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The shelves were filled with countless books that weren't placed in any reason or order. It was a complete mess. The architecture was formed of gold and dark wood, featuring intricate columns that once held tools. They now stood bare. Kinda reminds me of the houses back on Ophis, Francine said, as they all began to fan out and look around. She ran her fingers along the edge of a shelf, stirring up a thin layer of dust that floated in the dim light. "The Wraithies wish they were this interesting," Miakari added, as they looked around, his tail swishing as they did so. He then hopped up onto a nearby crate to get a better view of the room's layout. "God, this is strange," Andy said, the brow furrowing as they took in the sight before them. They flinched instinctively to a camera flash beside them, the sunburst of light cutting through the gloom like a knife. Winona was taking photos. The flash illuminated dust particles in the air, creating tiny sparkling motes that drifted lazily between the shelves. "These books must be so old! Look at them all!" Zizi said as she snagged one of them from the nearest shelf. It was heavy in her hands, the cover worn. She examined it with wide eyes. It was written in old Spark text, symbols and characters she couldn't even begin to understand. "They're big too! It's fun being small for once," she said, putting the book back carefully, but not before giving it one last longing look. "Welcome to my world," Andy said, as they gazed upon a sealed door at the far end of the room. It was their only exit, a thick slab of metal that seemed to have been designed to keep something in, or perhaps something out. "Oh, great, dead end," Francine said, her voice dropping with a sense of annoyance. She watched as Andy then walked over to the door, their boots echoing softly against the floor. Andy furrowed their brow and adjusted their cap with one hand. They walked over, knocked on the metal with their knuckles, and tried a lever at the side. No budge. The door didn't so much as rattle in its frame. Then they saw it, a loose panel on the wall, barely visible in the shadows. The edges didn't quite match with the surrounding metal, leaving a hairline gap. Slowly, they approached and pried it off, revealing the guts of the door mechanism. Inside, tons of wires pulsed with faint ambient light, their colors muted by age but still very much alive. Maybe I can get this open," they said, studying the tangle of connections. They got down on their knees, reaching for it. "My hands are small enough to actually reach inside. Can't say it'll be perfect, but this looks no different to normal wires back on Earth," they said as they got to work. "So help me God if green means bad and red means good," they added, muttering to themselves. Zizi stood beside them, watching curiously. She didn't understand how wires and connections fully worked herself, but she appreciated the way Andy's fingers found their way through the labyrinth without hesitation, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Winona continued snapping photos, her camera making soft clicking sounds as she captured the scene. She gazed at everything with a keen eye, cataloging details. Beside her, Francine shifted nervously. "You really think we'll be able to save the sparks?" Francine asked. She looked at the wall, seeing strange scratches embedded into its surface. They were shallow at first, almost like fingernail marks, but they grew deeper as the eye traveled upwards. Something had made these marks deliberately, with force and intention. "To tell you the truth, I actually don't know," Winona replied, not looking up from her camera as she snapped another photo. do gods that lost the ability to create somehow find a way to do so again? I want to believe we can, but only know for certain once we get there, she said, snapping a photo of the wall, which got her attention. She lowered her camera, slightly narrowing her eyes. On it were more carvings, looking to have been made by sharp claws. There were several images, stacked one above the other like a comic strip. The work was rough but unmistakable. It was a story told in scratches and gouges. It started off with what appeared to be a walking figure, a figure that carried a lot of stuff. The figure also looked to have a child with them, their hand clasping a much smaller silhouette, one that looked like a toy bunny. The next image showed what looked to be the ground rising in tendrils. From their judgment, they could only assume as to what it was. A monster? Dark matter? They didn't know. But what was undeniable was that it was taking the child. The following image showed the older figure trying to rescue this child. The lines conveyed desperation, the parent lunging towards the darkness that swallowed their offspring whole. The next showed the man and his items getting consumed by the darkness, the next appearing to show them merging. The child was nowhere to be seen, and the next was a scratched outline of what looked eerily similar to be the collector itself, rising from the dark matter. The rest of the images were scratches of what looked to be a little girl, over and over again. "The hell does this mean?" Winona asked, her voice a mix of confusion and unease. She set her camera down, suddenly less interested in documentation and more in understanding. "I'm not sure," Francine said. "Do you think the collector made this or something else?" she asked. Macri said, cocking their head like a confused dog. They hopped down from the crate and approached the wall. "It appears to show a parenty and a childie. The childie looks to have been taken by darknessy, and the parent too in trying to save the childie. Then the collectory? I don't get it," he said. "Yeah, me either. Did this parent become the collector, or is the daughter neither? Like, what is this?" Francine questioned, rubbing the back of her head in a gesture of frustration. "This could mean a lot of things, honestly, or maybe nothing at all." Winona frowned, her brow furrowed in thought. Then she examined something near the mural. It was very old. A plush bunny. It was faded and worn, one of its ears bent at an awkward angle. Her brow furrowed at the sight, and she reached out to touch it gently before thinking better of it. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening filled the space. There was a loud click, a whir of ancient mechanisms. Andy had done it. They'd gotten the door open. A beam of light cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating a corridor that stretched into shadow. "You did it! Well done!" Zizi cried as the others turned to face them. "Yeah. Let's move before that rusty hunk of junk finds us," Andy said with what sounded like anger in their tone, adjusting their hat and marching on without the others. Their voice was tight with stress and exhaustion. Cece turned and gestured for the rest to follow, to which they did. The group moved towards the door, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "Someone's grumpy," Francine said under her breath. Not quite a whisper, but not meant for Andy's ears either. "I mean, it's probably a lot to take in for them," Winona replied, giving Andy a concerned look. "Do you think bringing them was a good idea, or were we just too excited?" Winona then asked, her voice a little doubtful. "Voyd and Jaida brought their kid. They're fine," Francine replied, as they all made their way down the corridor. Ellie and Coco slowly walked through the factory chamber halls, their footsteps echoing faintly against the walls. The lights above flickered intermittently, casting long, jerking shadows that danced across the floor with each pulse. It would seem that some parts of the factory were still operational. Jay hovered between them, his small, protective crib bobbing gently in the air as he moved. He made little cooing sounds that filled the silence between their footsteps. His tiny hands gripped the edge of the crib as he drifted from one girl to the other, seemingly without a care in the world. They really weren't sure what to say to each other. The atmosphere of the abandoned facility presses down on them like a heavy blanket. Every corridor looked the same as the last. Ancient, decrepit, forgotten. When, all of a sudden, an unexpected sound filled their ears. It was faint at first, barely distinguishable from the ambient groans of the old building settling around them. But as they paused, the sound transformed into something unmistakable. Something pained. The sound of crying. Jay ceased his forward motion, his head tilting sharply to the side as his curiosity pulled him toward the noise. His tiny eyes widened, and he let out a soft, questioning sound. Apple? As though asking the universe to explain what he was hearing. Ellie and Coco looked at one another, their expressions mirroring the same mixture of confusion and concern. The faint crying echoed off the walls, reverberating through the empty hallway like a ghost calling out from somewhere deep within the facility. "You hear that too, right?" Coco asked. She reached behind her back, grabbing her staff. Ellie nodded. "Yeah, I do," she replied, craning her neck to peer down the corridor behind them. The darkness there seemed deeper somehow, more absolute than it should have been. "Hello?" She called out curiously, her voice trembling just slightly at the edges. But the crying continued from a ways off, growing neither louder nor closer, just persisting in its mournful rhythm. "That's not a baby, is it?" Ellie asked towards Coco, her brow furrowing with a combination of worry and something hard in the name. The sound was unmistakably young. Coco just shrugged uneasily, her eyes scanning the shadows ahead. "I don't know. It could be anything down here." Jay, however, was the most curious of the trio. His attention had been snagged like a fish on a hook, and nothing would sway it now. "Apple!" he muttered, tapping the front of his carriage with one small hand. Then, without waiting for permission, he began to hover back down the hall, heading towards the sound. "Wait, Jay!" Coco called after him, her voice filled with alarm as she broke into a jog to catch up. "Wait, you can't just... Jay!" "Oh boy." Ellie huffed under her breath, shaking her head as she followed the carriage. Of course he does this. Of course he just floats off into the unknown. How do we expect anything different from the child of Voyd Novason and Freaky Woods? But despite her grumbling, her pace was quick, her bat already gripped firmly in her hand just in case. As they jogged, the crying seemed to cease, replaced by an oppressive silence that somehow felt worse than the sound. But Jay was still moving. It was as though he knew exactly where to look, and it perplexed the two women behind him. They turned left and right, going around corners that seemed to twist and spiral deeper into the factory, passing rows of abandoned machinery and piles of rusted crates that had long since been forgotten by whoever once worked there. At last, Jay led them into a large open space. The room stretched out before them, vast and strange, and both women found themselves stopping in the doorway to take it in. It was a testing area by the looks of things. The ceiling towered high above them, lost in the darkness above the reach of the flickering green and blue lights. Large tables dominated the center of the room, their surfaces scarred and stained with age. Massive displays of rusted items lined the walls, screens dead and dark, instruments corroded beyond recognition. Many old parts and collections lay about for all to see, arranged in no apparent order. The room looked to have once been used to test items before they were distributed to whoever the Sparkborns were associated with. Their guess was the Sparks of old. It almost looked like a lab, an old forgotten lab. But it's what was in the center of the room that took their attention entirely. There on a pedestal-like device sat a glowing red dome of energy. The light it cast was soft but insistent, a warm hue that seemed to push back against the surrounding darkness with gentle determination. Inside the dome, they could see a shape, something small and huddled, facing away from them. The crying had stopped, but they could sense the presence now. A small life form that had been crying out. Ellie and Coco paused at the edge of the room, their footsteps grinding to a halt on the dusty floor. But Jay, still driven by his curiosity, hovered towards the glowing enclosure, prompting the women to follow with reluctant steps. What was inside the dome wasn't that big, about a foot tall. It was wrapped in a red blanket. No details could be seen, They heard it now. Faint sniffling, the aftermath of tears still being shed. The girls paused again, caught between caution and compassion. Jay, with curiosity, approached right up to the dome. The energy pulsed gently when he drew near, reacting to his presence with surges and ripples. He reached out, and with his tiny hand, he gently slapped the surface of the glowing barrier. That noise alone made whatever was inside the stop and perk up. The sniffling hitched, then fell silent. Slowly, the figure in the bundle turned around, the blanket shifting as small shoulders rotated to face them. At first, everyone saw two large red eyes with giant white pupils. The eyes were wet with tears, rimmed with exhaustion. After the initial startlement, the girls found themselves caught not by fear, but by wonder. The figure inside shook off the blanket in a motion reminiscent of a dog shaking water off its fur, a quick wiggling swish that sent the fabric sliding away from the small form. But it was no dog. It was a humanoid animal-like being. A little doe. A baby humanoid deer, similar to the woodland humankind like Jamie, but visibly a different being entirely. The baby was a girl. She had large eyelashes that fanned out against her cheeks, and a mass of poofy red hair that enveloped her entire head like a fluffy cloud. From within this crimson tangle, tiny little deep red antlers just barely poked out. Her fur was a red shade as well, soft and patched with more pink-like patterns around her lower face. This change in fur also looked to act like freckles across her upper face as well. Her nose was even a shiny scarlet color, glistening slightly in the light of the dome. Ellie and Coco were taken aback, their prepared weapons lowering as wonder replaced caution.
Oh my god. Ellie, it's a baby!
Coco said with surprise, her voice catching slightly. The sight of such a young life in this desolate place struck her somewhere deep, awakening a protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed. Is it a woodland human? No, that can't be possible, right? Ellie asked, her brow furrowing as she studied the creature's features. The baby moved forward, crawling toward Jay as he hovered even closer, his own curiosity reflected in her large red eyes. She wore an old red body piece, a simple garment that looked like it had been made for her, matched with small gloves that covered her tiny hands. Her feet, or rather her lack thereof, were exposed, however. Unlike woodland human deer who retain human-like feet despite their deer-like characteristics, this little one had actual hooves, small but sharp things that clicked softly against the pedestal surface as she moved.
No, I think she's from this realm, Ellie. Why would there be a baby in here by herself?
Coco asked, her voice tight with emotion. The question hung between them. Seeing the doe approach, Jay gently leaned forwards and pressed his palms against the dome. The energy rippled where his hands met it, spreading outwards in gentle waves like stones dropped in still water. He cooed in curiosity, his eyes meeting hers in a moment of pure connection.
Apple?
He said, his voice soft. In response, the little doe moved in the same way, placing her little hands up where Jay's were. She tilted her head curiously at the little spark, who mimicked her gestures exactly. The two regarded each other with fascination. The hell? Ellie asked, stepping closer despite herself, her bat hanging loosely at her side now. Are they communicating? Are you a spark doe? Where are your parents? The questions tumbled out, propelled by a mix of confusion and concern. The baby then looked at Ellie with curious eyes, then set her sights back at Jay, giving a small giggle that rang through the room like a bell.
Bello.
She said.
Apple.
Jay replied. Meanwhile, Ellie just scratched her head, completely lost in this exchange of baby talk. As this occurred, Coco looked around the room, taking in the full scope of their surroundings for the first time since entering. Her eyes swept across the scattered equipment, the rusted displays, the worn tables, and then she gasped, covering her mouth with one hand as she set her eyes upon the corner of the room.
Oh God! Ellie!
She said, her voice strangled with terror. "What?" Ellie asked, turned to see what had prompted such a reaction. But she halted upon seeing it too. Her blood ran cold. There, in the corner of the room, were 2 skeletons. The skeletons looked fresh, not too old. A thin layer of dust coated them, but the bone itself hadn't yet begun to deteriorate beyond recognition. Dark matter clung to them, slick and vicious, implying a death that wasn't so peaceful. A death that left its mark even on the remains. The skeletons wore what could almost be seen as tribal wear, torn cloths and rags that had once been colorful and meaningful, old feathers and leather pieces that were now stained. Whatever they were a native type of species, indigenous. But it was their skulls that made their hearts sink into their stomachs. They were deer-like, both with antlers, one set larger and more impressive, the other shorter and more delicate. One skeleton was larger, more than likely a male. The other was smaller with shorter antlers, the shape of her skull more refined, a female more than likely. In the male's arms, he held himself a wooden, gold-plated shotgun-like firearm. The weapon had been raised when he died, aimed at whatever had taken their lives. They looked to have died being backed into a corner, and the implication sent chills down their spines. Whatever had happened here, had happened fast, and had happened violently. "Oh my God," Ellie said, looking back to the baby doe who was playing with Jay, unaware or perhaps understanding far more than they realized. The 2 mimicked one another and laughed, sound jarring against the backdrop of death that surrounded them.
Ellie, you don't think the collector killed her parents, right?
Coco asked with a gulp, her hand still pressed to her mouth as though to hold back the nausea that threatened to overtake her. The thought of this small, innocent creature watching her parents die, being left alone in the tomb of a factory, it was haunting. Ellie shook her head, her eyes narrowing as she studied the dome with the baby within it. "If so, why the hell is she alive?" she asked, noticing the doe was looking a bit frail. "How long has she been here? Why is she alive but they're not?" They watched as Jay pressed his forehead to the dome, to which the doe did the same, mirroring the gesture. To their wonder, Jay's horns and her antlers glowed gently. Jay's a faint purple, and the doe's a bright red. Even her nose glowed, a soft luminescence that pulsed in time with her heartbeat.
"Ellie, what are we gonna do?"
Coco asked, pressing a hand to the dome. In response, the doe looked at Coco, and responded with the same motion, placing her small hands where Coco's palm was. She giggled upon seeing the frog's face. Coco's heart skipped a beat, her eyes stinging with tears as she gazed at the doe, feeling the need to help swell within her like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Ellie did the same, reaching out and pressing her hand to the dome. The energy hummed beneath her touch, warm and somehow reassuring. She watched as the baby responded to her as well, moving to greet her presence with the same open-hearted curiosity she had shown Jay.
Utka mamza, utka mama.
The baby said in a language they didn't understand. But even so, they could make out one syllable, one word that transcended the language barrier. Mama. Ellie's brow furrowed, her resolve hardening like steel in a forge. This wasn't a question anymore. This was a decision. "Step back," she said, her voice carrying a note of finality as she took her bat, gripping it with both hands.
"Ellie, don't smash it!"
Coco cried as she gently pushed Jay back.
"It's a baby, Ellie, you can't just..."
"I'm not gonna smash it," Ellie said, her tone both patient but impatient at once. She moved towards the pedestal, wedging the bat's bottom cap under the dome's lid, assessing the mechanism that held its barrier in place. "Just gonna," she said, before jerking the bat to the side with a firm yank. This caused the dome to suddenly crack, a spiderweb of glowing lines spreading outwards from where the bat had found its place. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire structure dissipated with an echoing shatter. The shards dissolved in the motes of light, floating upwards like fireflies. The baby looked on in wonder, her red eyes wide with astonishment at the sudden freedom she hadn't known was possible. "There we go," Ellie said, pulling back as the last of the energy faded. She looked at the doe, this tiny creature who had been caged for who knew how long, and felt something shift inside her. "Hey, little stinker, you okay?" she asked as she gently reached for the doe, her hands cupped beneath her small body with unexpected gentleness. In response, the baby reached out her arms, grasping towards the stranger who had freed her.
Appa!
She said, her voice lifting with hope and trust. Ellie smirked, taking the little one in her arms. The baby was lighter than she expected, her body fragile and small against Ellie's chest. She felt the tiny heart beating there, rapid and frightened but strong, so incredibly strong given everything she had been through. Coco sighed with relief, her shoulders dropping as the tension drained from her body. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed, reaching out to stroke the doe's hair gently. Oh, look at you. Aren't you adorable?" Ellie said, shifting the baby in her arms so she could get a better look at her face. The doe blinked up at her with those enormous red eyes. A small smile curved at her lips despite everything. She was filthy and frightened, but she was alive. She was alive. "We're gonna get you out of here, little one. I promise," Ellie said, as Coco rounded about, taking a look at her as well. Her eyes were soft with compassion. "Oh, poor thing. Don't worry. We'll get you out of here," she assured as well, as she looked at Jay's carriage. "You think she'll fit?" Ellie nodded her head, and set the little one inside the carriage beside Jay. The two looked at each other, Jay with his blank curiosity, and the doe with an open-mouthed wonder. Into their adored eyes, the doe began nuzzling into Jay. She pressed her small body against him in the carriage, seeking warmth, comfort, and contact after so long. Jay looked confused at first, but he allowed it to happen, letting the small creature lean against him as though they had always been friends. "Oh, she likes him," Coco said with glee, her earlier terror giving way to genuine delight. In the midst of all of this darkness, something light had found its way through. However, before another moment could be shared, they all heard the sounds of mechanical footsteps and gurgling. The noise came from somewhere in the facility, growing closer with every passing second. The collector was near, the thing that had claimed the doe's parents. It was coming. "Ah, shit!" Coco cried as she quickly closed the hatch of the carriage, sealing Jay and the baby inside together. Her hands trembled, her eyes darting to the skeletons in the corner. "Get down!" Ellie snapped, shoving Coco in the carriage behind a flipped-over table. They moved as one, tugging themselves into the shadows, as the mechanical sounds grew louder, closer, unmistakably heading toward the room. As she hid, Ellie eyed the dead doe's parents once more, her gaze falling on the weapon still clutched in the male skeleton's grip. She grunted, and quickly snatched it from the bone-cold fingers. "Sorry, man, I might need this," she said to the bones. Then she rejoined Coco and the kids beside the table, pressing herself flat against the cold floor as the sounds of movements reached the doorway. Once hidden, she popped open the gun, her eyes scanning the mechanism for ammunition. Instead of shells, she found an energy crystal connected to the chamber, glowing with a soft red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "The hell?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she examined the strange technology. That's when they heard it, the heavy footfalls entering the room. Ellie snapped the gun closed, the crystal humming in its chamber like a caged animal ready to be unleashed. It was close. The collector was so incredibly close. Ellie could feel Maple trembling in the carriage beside her. She could hear Jay's soft coo of confusion and fear. Coco was pressed against her side, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that Ellie could feel against her arm. All of them listened with bated breath, waiting to see if the collector would find them, waiting to see if they would make it out of this place alive, waiting to see if hope was something they were still allowed to have. The footsteps continued through the room, moving with a horrible, deliberate slowness. Ellie could hear the gurgling sounds accompanying them, a wet, choking noise. She held the gun ready, her fingers on the trigger, her eyes fixed on the edge of the table where shadows danced with each flicker of the lights. The footsteps paused, the gurgling stopped. Then slowly, something began to move toward them.
No.
The collector cried, throwing things around.
Daughter, no. Why leave me again? Come back.
The collector boasted as it thrashed the room.
I will save you. Let me save you. The voices. I tried. I've given you everything. I build, I take. Come back to me. Come back to Papa.
The beast roared before it stomped off, leaving the girls silent and in shock. They looked to each other, eyes as small as pinpricks. We need to move now, Ellie said. Yes, I agree, Coco replied as they both quickly stood and sprinted out of the room, the protecto crib following them in perfect pace. Heavy doors swung outwards one by one, each group tumbling through in quick succession until they all converged in a single space. They had found each other at last. A chamber stretched before them, vast and impossibly complex. It was like a cathedral of stone and shadow, filled with stairways that crisscrossed in endless patterns, all leading upward toward an opening where pale yellow light filtered down from somewhere above.
See? That wasn't so bad.
Jack called out as the others scrambled to reunite. Jay! Mommy and Daddy are here! Are you okay? Jaida's voice cracked with relief as she and Voyd hurried towards the carriage. Ellie and Coco reached them first. She placed a steadying hand on the carriage hatch, keeping it partially closed. Hey, relax. Your baby's fine. But, Ellie began, her words catching her throat. She exchanged a glance with Coco, who shifted uncomfortably beside her. Voyd and Jaida paused, noticing the unease in their friend's posture. We found something, Ellie said, her tone uneasy and uncertain. Her eyes flicked towards the carriage. Rather, someone? Coco added, both women offering strained smiles that did nothing to reassure the awaiting parents. What are you talking about? Voyd asked, with an eyebrow raised. Take a look for yourself, Papa Bear, Ellie muttered quietly, as she and Coco stepped aside in unison. Together with curiosity with a mix of nervousness in their eyes, Voyd and Jaida reached forward and opened the hatch to Jay's carriage. What they and everyone else saw took them by complete surprise. Inside, having taken his spot nestled among the blankets, was the doe. She laid on her back with a half-awake, half-asleep gaze, her small body relaxed and sprawled. Behind her, sucking rapidly on her right antler, was Jay. The baby's eyes were wide and happy as he suckled, leaving a small trail of drool dripping down onto the blanket below. The baby doe murmured, her large red eyes drifting lazily between the faces staring down at her. Jay simply continued his sucking motion, treating the antler as though if it were his personal pacifier. A collective pause filled the group. The silence was heavy with shock and, overall, curiosity. Several of the members exchanged puzzled glances, none of them able to form words at the unexpected sight before them. Who's this? Jaida asked finally, her voice a mixture of wonder and concern. All eyes shifted down to the doe. Baby deer creature, we think, Ellie explained, rubbing the back of her neck sheepishly. She was locked up in some stupid dome. Her parents were, dead in the same room. It looked really bad. The revelation landed like a stone dropped in the water. Shock rippled through the assembled group. By Matira, are you serious? Is she okay? Voyd asked, with his voice dropping. He stepped closer to the hover carriage, examining the little creature with familiar eyes, the eyes of someone who understood what it meant to lose family. Coco reached down and carefully lifted the doe from the carriage, cradling her against her chest. The little creature went willingly, her tiny gloved hands curling at Coco's armor as Jay flopped over sideways where he'd been propped. A trail of drool still glistened on his lower lip. I mean, she seems fine, Coco said with a smile breaking across her face, as the deer nestled closer and offered a tiny buck-toothed smile in return. We couldn't leave her, not with that thing running around the temple. It had a complete hissy fit when I realized she was gone, Coco went on with a nervous look. The collector? Winona asked. The woman nodded. It was keeping her, Coco added. Like she was some kind of prize. We weren't about to leave her there. We couldn't. Everyone set their eyes up then, looking toward the vast array of stairs that filled the chamber like a spider's web frozen in time. There were a lot of them, too many of them, winding and branching in seemingly impossible patterns, all crisscrossing and zigzagging in their ascent. Well, this is our exit, I guess, Andy said, mentally preparing themselves for the massive climb ahead. Yeah, let's get a move on before... Francine began, when the doors behind them suddenly sealed shut. It finds us, Francine finished with a gulp. Then came the sound of metal cranking and scratching somewhere deep within the temple structure, accompanied by a heavy, labored breathing that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. The noise grew louder, more insistent. Everyone snapped their heads up, cursing under their breath, witnessing as the collector appeared once again. It was as if it had simply materialized out of nowhere. It launched itself from above, latching onto the staircases with disturbingly agile hands, swinging from step to step as though they were monkey bars in some chaotic playground. With a grotesque lurch, it threw itself downwards, landing in their midst with a thunderous crash that reverberated through the stone floor. The chamber reacted to its arrival. Cracks in the ancient stone began to glow with an angry red hue, spreading like veins of fire across the ground. The factory's old mechanism suddenly surged to life with groaning protest. The ground began to rumble beneath their feet as alarms shrieked and ancient machines snapped awake from all around. Floodlights embedded in the stairwell snapped on in rapid succession, flashing and blinding high beams that strobed across the chaos. The room suddenly felt disorienting, the combination of light and sound threatening to overwhelm the senses. The collector rose to its full height, filling the space with an aura of malevolent purpose.
You are mine, daughter, give her back. The dark will take her again. She can be saved. Stay.
It cried and wheezed with a panicking tone without warning. Then, it suddenly lunged for the doe, claws extended, intent on reclaiming what it had considered its property. Reacting fast, Voyd summoned his Nova Blade. The weapon materialized in his grip with a flash of blue light, and he slashed at the snapping claw. The blade connected, drawing a hiss of pain and surprise from the collector as it stumbled back. Everyone, up the stairs! I'll handle this jigsaw puzzle-looking freak! Voyd commanded, dropping into a defensive stance with his blade ready. Not alone, you're not! Core boasted, his spear appearing in his hand as he stepped beside his brother. Damn right! Sky exclaimed, summoning her twin blades with a flourish, her wheels deployed beneath her feet. Everyone else get above! We'll deal with this bastard! Sky called as Core readjusted his grip on his spear, getting into a fighting stance. His eyes locked onto the collector, assessing and calculating. Jaida, Toonie, protect the kids! Voyd demanded, not taking his eyes off the threat before them. Both of them nodded as everyone began to make their way for the stairs. Be careful! Cece cried, her voice tight with fear for her friends. They're the children of the Iron Maiden, Cogson assured with a knowing smirk. They'll be just fine, he added. Who's the Iron Maiden? Cece asked. The old-timer simply smirked again, leaving the question unanswered as they climbed. Below, the three siblings readied themselves for battle, the weapons glowing with inner light as spark essence flowed through them. The collector faced them, its form shifting and writhing as it prepared for conflict. With sharp metallic clanks of its hands, the creature morphed. Two deadly buzzsaws emerged from out of its upper right and lower left arm, spinning to life with hungry whines that filled the chamber with an ominous sound. The collector raised its weapons, and the siblings did the same. Silence hung in the air for one breathless moment, a pause before a storm, until the pouring began. Voyd and Core swiftly lunged forwards, their blades swung in a mix of orange and sapphire arcs, meeting one of the collector's buzzing saws in a blaze of fury. The impact shuddered through their arms as Sky revved her boots, but the brothers twisted, using the rebound to slice at the dark matter where the saw met the limb. Their sword and spear cut deep, and a spray of darkness erupted forth. "Sorry, but we're not the ones on the chopping block," Voyd called as the collector shrieked and swung the second saw downwards. Voyd and Core barely sidestepped. Voyd's blade flashed again, deflecting the saw towards the ground, while everyone else continued to sprint to safety from above. The impact sent a ripple of cracks across the floor, and Voyd used this moment to strike with another slash. Core then summoned a quick Nova Rune and punched it down to the side of the collector. The monster recoiled, its limbs contorting in pain, but it quickly recovered, its lanky body scuttling backwards. Skyla moved like a blur of motion. Her wheels screeched against the stone as she rolled forward with a green burst of energy. She spun, her Nova blades whipping through the air. The collector parried. The saw clanged against the spark essence, sending a cascade of green that danced with the flashing lights. The collector's limbs thrashed, attempting to crush her, but Sky's wheels allowed her to slide just out of reach. Her movement was like a fluid dance between the monster's attacks. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she sent a Nova Rune hurtling towards the monster's head. The rune burst in a flash of emerald light, the explosion rippling across the collector's mismatched body like a shockwave. The dark matter monster staggered, its legs wobbling. Sky used that pause. She rounded about and threw her blades. The weapon sank into the collector's abdomen, and she pulled, the energy chains yanking the monster forward, exposing a gleaming, pulsing orange dark matter heart beneath its head. She didn't have time to strike, however, as the collector twisted its long limbs, suddenly wrapping a claw around her torso and throwing her aside. Voyd moved fast, leaping up and catching his sister before landfall.
Return to me, return to me! The dark, it's so dark!
The collector cried. Core then lifted his spear, and with a quick motion, he slammed the head of it into the ground. A burst of crackling energy of spark essence erupted, forming a Nova Blast that rocketed towards the collector. The blast lit the flashing stairwell, and the monster recoiled from the strike. While the collector was disoriented, Core quickly activated his shotgun. He pumped a blast, the double barrels glowing with the same orange energy. In the echoing space, it made for a deafening roar that sent a barrage of spark essence directly at the creature's exposed organ. The shot rippled through a cluster of metal and dark matter as it did so, and the collector let out a guttural scream. The monster's movements became erratic, jerky, uncontrolled spins, but it was far from defeated. With a sudden surge of energy, it lashed out, its claws extending like jagged spears on a whip of dark matter and wires. The claws sliced through the air, catching Core's arm. He was swiftly yanked to the ground. Voyd and Sky moved back into the fight. Like Core, they were snagged and thrown aside harshly, stone cracking under their impacts. The three groaned in pain and looked up, watching the beast roar and begin to climb after their ascending friends and family. "No!" Core gruffed as he stood to his feet.
"Looks like we're gonna have to bust out the big one for this bastard,"
he said as he reached behind his back and pulled out the dark red and black matter sprite from before. Voyd raised an eyebrow as Sky spoke. "Core, are you sure? You know how much that one hurts," she said, and Core nodded.
"I know. I'd rather feel temporary pain than suffer a loss,"
Core said as he prepared to crush the sprite. "Wait, what does that one do?" Voyd asked as he self-healed. "See for yourself," Sky said as Core crushed the dark matter sprite in his palm. A sudden transformation began to take shape. Core grunted in sudden pain, clutching his body as something beneath his skin writhed and moved in ways that defied natural physics. His fingers curled inwards as he pressed them against his chest as though trying to hold something back. "Core?" Voyd called out, his voice cracking with concern. He started forward, but Sky put her hand in front of him, stopping him. "It's okay," she said, her voice steady despite the horror unfolding before them. "He's done this before." She watched with an expression that mixed familiarity with lingering unease. Core's skin began to ripple, the surface flowing like liquid. He glistened with sweat that wasn't quite sweat, his body appearing to melt and reform simultaneously. Then it truly began. Core slammed both of his hands against the ground, palms down. It began to grow and writhe, stretching and deforming in ways that made Voyd's stomach turn. Dark matter took over the metal skin of his body, consuming his hands and transforming them into large, sharp claws of ooze. The dark substance spread upwards, enveloping his arms and his torso, enlarging his frame with every passing second. His legs were consumed next. the dark matter reshaping them to something longer, something backward bent and distinctly unnatural. His armor bulged and strained, but somehow remained held together as the dark matter forced more changes upon his body. The transformation was brutal, efficient, and utterly terrifying to witness. The cape was enveloped entirely. From his newly formed back, dagger-like shards of orange erupted. They arranged themselves in the 3 rows of crystal spines that pulsed with an inner light. His horns elongated as well, growing bigger and sharper, glowing with crackling orange energy that cast strange shadows across his twisted features. Core then closed his eyes. Something had changed. His mouth gaped wide, revealing a massive orange eye on the inside where his tongue and teeth should have been. His normal eyes had melted into this new form, absorbed into whatever creature Core was becoming. As the transformation finished, Core threw his arms back and unleashed a roar that echoed through the chamber. Before Voyd could even process what he'd witnessed, this monstrous form of his brother leapt upwards, propelling himself toward the Collector with devastating speed. Voyd stood at a total loss for words. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what he had just seen. His brother transforming into a dark matter beast. What the f- I know. Sky cut him off, her hand moving to his shoulder in a form of comfort. Just take it in, baby bro. Just take it in. She nodded towards the chaos above. As the others ran up the stairs, the Collector landed before them with a heavy thud that rattled them. It deployed more buzzsaws that spun wildly.
Give it to me! Please give it to me!
The beast cried, its voice a mixture of desperation and barely contained rage.
She will find her way from the dark. Give the child to me. She's mine. All mine.
Its mechanical limbs reached for the carriage, claws scraping against the stairs' sides as it searched for the dough. Before anyone could react, Ellie raised her new shotgun and pulled the trigger. An energized blast rang out, puncturing holes into the Collector's chest and sending pieces of dark matter and metal flying across space. The creature screamed in protest, protecting its heart. She fired again, the recoil pressing against her shoulder as everyone frantically guarded the children with desperate panic in their eyes. The shotgun hummed with each shot. "Buzz off, freak!" she shouted, shooting again, staggering the beast backwards. But before she could get off another round, Core leapt upon the beast from below. Almost everyone screamed in confused horror as Core's dark matter form slammed down the Collector. The impact shook the entire stairwell as he grabbed the creature by what served as its head and slammed it into the stairs. Stone fractured and metal shrieked. "What the hell is that?" Andy shouted, the voice cracking with terror. "It's Papa!" Joby cried with a smile. "What?" Jaida cried out, her hand hovering in front of Jay and the dough. "Core, are you serious? You're using that one?" Zika tried to shout, but the words were lost as the two beasts began the battle on the stairs. They slammed claws into each other, exchanged punches that would have shattered bone, and grappled in a tangle of dark matter and machinery. Core pulled back suddenly, yanking both of them off the stairwell ledge. "Go, go!" Cogson cried, pointing his cane towards the upper platforms. The urgency in his voice cut through the shock. They didn't waste time. They ran on as the two fell. Falling through the stairwell, Core spun the Collector around, using the wounded being as a shield to cushion the fall. They slammed through a lower stairway, crashing against the floor below in hard impacts that shook the entire structure. Voyd and Sky stepped back, pressing themselves against the wall as Core pounced on the Collector once more. The two rolled across the floor, slashing and punching, delivering blows that would have killed any normal creature. Claws dug into one another, dark matter clanking against metal as both roared in their defiance. "Climatera!" Voyd gasped as the battle rolled dangerously close to their position. Sky grabbed him and pulled him further out of the way, keeping them clear of the onslaught. With a shriek, the Collector rammed a buzzsaw on the Core's side, spinning blades biting deep into the dark matter. Core roared in rage, the sound vibrating through the chamber. Swiftly, the large spark shot out his clawed hand and snagged the arm attached to the saw. With a hard yank, he pulled the limb away, tearing through cables and mechanisms until the arm came free. He threw it aside where it clattered against the cold floor. The Collector shrieked in protest, but Core wasn't done. He knocked the beast back fully, leaping up and pouncing upon it with the full weight of his monstrous form. Core tore into it with primal fury. He tore away its arms, tossing metal and shrapnel aside with each movement. He ripped off its legs with strength that was beyond his own. And then, when the collector could no longer fight back, he delivered the finishing blow.
Macy, please return. Let me return to you.
The collector said as the fight left it. Core, with a powerful yank, used both hands to rip the entity's head from its body. The metal spinal cord along with its heart remained connected, hanging limp and trailing wires as the lifeless monster collapsed. Core raised the head up and screamed towards the heavens, the sound sending shivers down Voyd's spine. He held the trophy there for a long moment, his massive chest heaving. Then he threw the head aside with a gruff sound of dismissal, as the collector's body fell apart on the floor, its remaining components sparking and settling in the nothingness, its dark matter fading. Voyd stood mouth agape as Core slowly turned towards his siblings. He shrugged his massive shoulders, and something that might have been a smile crossed his features. At least that's what Voyd assumed from the way his large mouth eye narrowed. He was still in there. Voyd could see it in his expression, but Voyd still found himself wishing the power-up would wear off. Nice, Sky said, giving a thumbs up despite everything. The gesture was so absurdly normal that it made Voyd even more uneasy. Core responded with a gruffing sound, as well as something that might have been teary saliva dribbled from his mouth. The sound he made wasn't quite a laugh, but it wasn't angry either. Whatever acknowledgement he could give, he gave it, before settling into a waiting stance as the transformation began to reverse itself. Up and out of the massive stairwell, everyone stood on a landing near the factory's exit, looking toward the ledge where they expected the three to appear. Soon enough, both Voyd and Sky flew up, the wings materializing just long enough to carry them upward before dissolving in the motes of light. Core followed, leaping up and landing behind them with a heavy thud that cracked the floor. His monstrous frame was still huge, still mighty, still wrong, but the dark matter was still receding. Jesus Christ, what happened to him? Toonie asked as the power-up continued to wear off. He watched, transfixed as Core's body fully reset to its natural build. Core groaned, the sound normal again, and shook off the remaining spikes from his body. They clattered to the ground, dissolving into dark wisps as they separated from him. Core breathed, and his voice was finally his own again. He straightened, flexing his fingers as normalcy returned to his hands. "The dark matter sprite," he said. "It allows for a controlled hold of its power to hulk you into a monstrous state." He rolled his shoulders and cracked his back, the transformation clearly having a big effect on him. They're very useful, but rare to come by. I only have one more left in my pouch." Everyone caught their breath, shock slowly giving way to understanding. It was a lot to take in, but they had survived. They were alive, and that's all that mattered. "Are the kids okay?" Voyd asked, looking towards the group where Jay and the little doe were safe in the protecto crib. Jaida nodded, while her hand rested gently on Jay's head. "Yeah, are you?" she asked with genuine concern. Voyd nodded slowly. I'll be fine." They all set their eyes back on Jay and the doe, who were looking at everyone with curious eyes. "So, what is she?" Andy asked, breaking the silence. "And what do we do about her?" They continued as Jay went back to teething on her antler.
A hooflin!
Jet suddenly said, deploying over Voyd's head without any command.
Hooflins are native beings that live a more troubled life than the Matter Realm. However, they are rare to come by, normally only living in small communities of around 3 to 4 members. They are spaced throughout the realm's planets.
He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something almost hesitant in his voice.
If you're saying her parents are dead, that unfortunately means...
That means she's really on her own. Ellie finished. She walked over and picked the doe up, much to Jay's disappointment. The two locked eyes, Ellie and this strange small creature. Ellie felt pity on the doe, and then something more when it reached out and held her cheeks. The hoofling giggled and smiled, filling Ellie's chest with a warm, fuzzy feeling that she hadn't expected to feel to such an extent. She laughed before holding the baby close to her chest. The hoofling rested against her and finally fell asleep.
What's so funny, Ellie?
Coco asked, genuinely confused by her partner's sudden fit of laughter. Ellie looked back at Coco, her face mixed with emotions, laughter and realization, and something that looked almost like clarity. Sorry, she said, composing herself. I think I just decided that I'm gonna take care of her. A pause fell upon the group. The weight of her words settled over everyone as they processed what Ellie had just said. Wait, what? Voyd asked with genuine surprise. He looked at Ellie as though she'd suddenly grown a second head. You're gonna raise this kid? You? Francine asked, the questions flowing as everyone gazed at the doe. Coco especially looked on with shock, her expression unreadable. Ellie sighed, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She stalled, thinking back to, of all things, the incident, to everything that had happened. Her mind went to her brother, to all that occurred on Ophis. Then came back to the baby in her arms, so small and alone. She needs someone to protect her, Ellie said. She was going to die from whatever that thing had planned. I won't leave her. She looked down at the Hoovlin's peaceful face as she slumbered in her arms. I always thought about adopting a kid. She looked back to Coco, who stood bewildered at the sight.
Ellie, you realize how big of a responsibility that is, right?
Ellie nodded without hesitation. I know. Look at her, Cokes. She gestured gently toward the sleeping deer. Look at her. Coco stared for a long moment, her expression softening. She sighed finally, a smile breaking through. You do realize this will consume our lives, right? She asked, but there was no real objection in her voice. She moved closer, stroking the Hoovlin's hair with a gentle touch. Ellie nodded again. What's wrong with a little bit more chaos? She asked, her grin returning. As her and Coco chuckled together, the tension in the group broke. Laughter, tired but genuine, began to spread. Did we just witness an adoption live? Tooney asked, to which Francine slapped the back of his head. Is the sky blue? She asked. No, it's green, Sky replied from nearby, smirking at the redhead. Francine pinched the skin between her eyes, while Tooney chuckled. Oh, whatever, he admitted. Huh. Well, alright then, Voyd said with a smile breaking across his face. Looks like you have a friend, Jay. He nodded towards his son as Jaida went over to greet the little doe. Jay just babbled for a moment. Then the Hoovlin was placed back beside him. Jay immediately clung to her, rubbing his forehead on hers in a gesture of affection. Oh my goodness, that's adorable, Jaida said, pressing a hand to her mouth as her heart melted at the sight. They collected themselves and began to move ahead. In the distance, they could see an exit to the factory. And there, waving towards them with one fat arm, was Brumble. He had been waiting for a good while. As they approached, the group's pace picked up. And whatever came next, they'd face it together. In the midst of it all, Ellie and Coco felt a new chapter opening in their lives.